Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of Post-Secondary Pathways. This one's titled Pathways to Success, Be Self-Care Aware. My name is Dr. Madeline Smith, and I'm the Director of Higher Education at the Hunt Institute. For those unfamiliar with the Institute, we were founded by four-term North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt and serve as a resource for policymakers on education issues across the education continuum through in-person and virtual convenings, research, and other forms of technical assistance. So in this webinar, you will hear from resource experts who will provide us tips and best practices on how to practice self-care for our own well-being, as well as promoting it for all those in post-secondary education. So before I get the conversation started, I do want to provide a brief logistical overview. We'll start the discussion today with about a 30-minute moderated discussion with our panelists, and then we'll pivot to a Q&A with the audience. If you have any questions throughout the discussion, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them during the discussion. Additionally, we will record this conversation and post on our YouTube channel for folks to view afterwards if you'd like. So for those attending today's discussion, we also encourage you to share the conversation on social media using the hashtag postpathways. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. So turning to you first, Dr. Demma Payne, who is a licensed clinical mental health counselor and referral and case management liaison at Duke University. Dr. Payne, can you tell us more about the current state of mental health on campus and the way the pandemic has heightened mental health concerns?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Smith, for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. So 3 in 5 college students reported being diagnosed with a mental health condition by a professional. The most common of those afflictions were being anxiety and depression. So that's significantly higher than just the general population overall, which 48% of them were diagnosed with mental health concerns. So I would say the current state of mental health on campus, I would phrase it as preventively proactive. There's been a greater demand for mental health services than there has been prior to the pandemic. There's also been a decrease in terms of just the stigma around mental health and mental illness as well. A study from an organization called Healthy Minds, which is an annual multi-survey looking at issues including mental health on campus, suggests that young people are finding it more socially acceptable to talk about mental health and mental health concerns that they're having, which is making them more likely to seek services. So we've certainly seen an uptick in here at Duke Caps, just the amount of students that are coming in for services. And a lot of them are coming in now, not necessarily having a mental health concern, but wanting services so they can be prepared in case they have a mental health concern that may arise. The pandemic was, I think, detrimental to just about everyone. And if you think of it from a college student's perspective, from a freshman's perspective, coming into school, 2020, expecting, you have certain expectations, move-in day, socializing with peers, getting to know the campus, getting to know where your classes are. A lot of them, all of them missed out on that particular growth opportunity. Our seniors that graduated in 2020, being able to kind of go out and really enjoy campus, enjoy your last memories while here at Duke. In graduation, they missed out on that as well. So there were a lot of milestones that students unfortunately missed out on while in the height of the pandemic. So I certainly think that our students that are currently here are definitely being more proactive and just seeking those mental health services so they can cope with any anxiety or depression or any various mental health stressors that they have. And I know one thing that we like to stress to them and kind of reiterate to them is making sure that they're not pouring from an empty cup. And when we say that, we discuss kind of making sure that they're not burning themselves out, that they have the mental health capacity that they need to kind of function as a student, as a emerging adult. So making sure that they're taking care of their mental health in a sense.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Payne, for that insight at the institutional level. And I think certainly inspires hope in me, and I know my colleagues, to hear that these issues are being more and more destigmatized on campus, and students are feeling more able to talk about them and more open to talking about them. So I'm glad to hear of your work in that area. And Dr. Bethany Menn, we'll turn to you next. You are the Vice President for Student Affairs at the University of North Carolina System Office. Can you tell us more about your role and the ways in which your office supports student mental health across all of UNC's institutions?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Smith, for the opportunity to be here today and talk more about the good work that's happening across the University of North Carolina system. For those of you that aren't familiar with our system, we are the 16 public four-year universities in North Carolina. You might have heard of a couple of them. We have the wonderful East Carolina up in Greenville, go Pirates, to UNC Chapel Hill, NC State. You may have heard of our UNC School of the Arts, a public arts conservatory in Winston-Salem. We also have 5 historically Black colleges and universities, with North Carolina A&T State University this year being the largest HBCU in the country. Go Aggies. We also have 2 residential high schools for students excelling in math and science. One of them is located in the Durham area and one is in Morganton. And each year we enroll more than 220,000 students across North Carolina, and we're very proud to say, and each year we graduate up to 55,000 students between undergraduate and graduate programs. So we've got 16 huge institutions across the state and 2 wonderful residential high schools. And so, like most university systems across the country, we have seen a significant increase in the incidence of mental health challenges among our students. And as Dr. Payne had noted, this is only accelerated with COVID. We've seen increasing rates of students entering our institutions with already diagnosed mental health diagnoses. Nationwide reports indicate anywhere between 20 to 30% of our incoming students are arriving with a previous mental health diagnosis. We've also unfortunately seen an increase in the rates of suicidal ideation. You know, college mental health surveys across the country are indicating that anywhere between 10 to 15% of college students have had serious thoughts of suicide within the past 12 months, which is very alarming. And then we've seen the rise in traumatic incidences. I think there's this notion that perhaps students lack grit or they don't have the resilience for these everyday challenges, but lots of data out there is showing that these are really difficult times students are experiencing. These are traumatic life events where they've lost a parent or a family member from COVID. They're dealing with a lot of interpersonal emotional issues. And so we as a system need to be committed to really helping address those needs, because this is a student success tool for us. And Dr. Payne alluded to this, the demand for mental health services across our campuses is exploding. And I think part of it is what he mentioned, right? There's not this stigma anymore. People don't want to suffer in silence. So you know, we as a system have really taken it upon ourselves to make sure that we're providing our students with the best mental health resources that we can, just like you'd provide students with the writing center, tutoring center, library. Making sure that they've got the great resources for mental health is really important. So just want to talk about a couple of things that we've done system-wide, and I'm going to put a couple links in the chat. Before the pandemic, we launched a working group that put together a really good analysis of what's going on across our institution and what are our mental health needs. And so I'm going to post that report in the chat. It's called Healthy Minds, Strong Universities. And within that report, there were several recommendations of things that we could be doing to make our students more resilient and help them, you know, figure out ways to deal with these mental health concerns so that they are lifelong learners. They've got these great skills, that they're successful in college, and then when they leave our doors. And so we were very fortunate to receive funding from the governor's office to do a lot of this implementation. And one of the great things that we recently did was we were able to do a grant program, and I'm going to put a link in the chat so you can see it. We were able to award mental health grants across the system to 12 institutions, and I'll put the link in the chat so you can look at all the different programs. But I just want to highlight 2 that I think are really so innovative and exciting. One is a counselor in residency program at UNC Pembroke. As you can imagine, it's difficult to recruit new counselors, new professionals to Pembroke, North Carolina. And so they have a counselor in residence program where they were able to hire a new recruit, provide them housing in the residence hall, and then that counselor is working with that residential population. That's wonderful, right? Solves that staffing challenge, but also provides this wonderful care in the residence halls for those students. We also have UNC Wilmington that is doing the QPR training. If you've never done the Question, Persuade, Refer training, that's another great program that we've launched this year. The next thing that we were able to fund is mental health first aid training. I hope many of you have had the opportunity to become mental health first aiders. If not, I'm going to put a link in the chat, and I hope that you'll sign up for that program too. Thanks to funding from the governor's office, this was not just a system initiative, but we are working with the 116 public higher education institutions in the state to fund this program. So if you want to be trained as an instructor please reach out to me. Or if you'd like us to come to your university and get more first aiders, we're happy to do that. And what's wonderful is all this funding comes from the governor's office, so we can help get you instructors paid for and pay for all the materials. So we're very thankful to have that. And as many of you know, we need more eyes and ears on the ground. And that's the great thing about the mental health first aid training, right? Because not everybody's coming to the counseling center when they need help. Not everybody's going where you need them to. But, you know, if you have your dining hall staff that's trained in this, your housekeeping staff, their peers, so they can start recognizing those signs, we've got more boots on the ground to really help create this culture of care, which is so important. Two more things I want to talk about. I know my time is running out, but I'm really excited. Is one, we've launched the Thriving Campus platform, and I'm going to put that link in the chat too. This is a platform to help connect students with providers across the state. While we do have providers on our campuses, sometimes we're limited in that capacity. So we were able to launch a pilot where 9 of our institutions are using the Thriving Campus platform to connect students to providers in real time, which is wonderful. Two more things. We also have our mental health. I'm sorry, Dr. Payne, I'm so excited by this one. So we were able to create a fund for support for off-campus services. So there's micro grants for off-campus services. So if you have a specialized mental health condition that you need help for, that your institution doesn't have that capability, or you just need to see someone more consistently, you can apply for a grant and it will help pay for that treatment, which is wonderful. And we know if we can get students treated sooner, that means they're going to have a better semester, they're going to have a better long-term year. And then lastly, we just launched this month a shared psychiatry Telepilot. So we have 4 institutions that will be sharing a psychiatrist, actually 2 psychiatrists, to deliver psychiatric care. And we need that because in many of our institutions where they're located geographically, there aren't enough psychiatrists. And we need those wonderful professionals to help with the med management plan. Because if we can get a student on a really solid, thoughtful med management plan, not only are we going to make sure that they're more successful when they're with us for the 4 years or 6 years, but gosh, if you can get on a good med management plan now, then your lifetime of being able to deal with this is so much better. And so we're so excited to be able to do that. And these are all really in thanks to wonderful funding from the governor's office. But I will stop now, or I could go on, but thank you.
Thank you. We certainly appreciate your enthusiasm, Dr. Mann, and those were alarming statistics you shared at the beginning, but I think the culture of care will definitely be capturing that phrase that you used for our takeaways from today's session, something that campuses across the country can certainly learn from and benefit from. So thank you for that perspective. And then Lee, turning to you, from a doctoral level perspective and as a research analyst in the Laboratory for the Study and Prevention of Suicide-Related Conditions and Behaviors at Florida State University, can you tell us more about the stress that students face on campus and how this contributes to mental health concerns from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you for having me. As Dr. Smith said, I'm in the Joiner Suicide Research Lab here at FSU, and I'm a clinical psychology PhD student. So we do a lot of suicide prevention focused research and more broadly, mental health focused research. For me specifically, I do a lot of work with socially marginalized individuals. So for example, right now I'm focused on a study about the effect of microaggressions on PTSD symptoms and thoughts of suicide in intersectionally marginalized individuals, and we're working with college students at FSU as our sample. So just to talk about some of the things that students are facing, both in my experience, just being on campus as a graduate student, as well as looking at the research that I'm engaged in right now, like the empirical research, and as well from looking at, other research studies on this topic. There are a lot of, of course, more obvious stressors that people think about when they think about colleges and universities, exams, applying for graduate school, jobs, paying tuition, paying rent if you live off campus. We notice in our research that there's oftentimes a spike in thoughts of suicide and suicide risk over the course of the semester around midterm and around final exams. Those are definitely like high times of stress for college and university students, but there are also less school specific stressors generated just, by the environment, like losing built-in support structure, friends that you grow up with, family that you grow up with. There can also be, you know, kind of a culture shock effect of, you know, universities being these melting pots oftentimes compared to more, you know, segregated areas that folks might have grown up in. And that can cause a lot of interpersonal stress, especially for people from socially marginalized backgrounds who might have really salient experiences of discrimination while they're in college and university. A lot of people, you know, are figuring out their identities during college, like LGBTQ plus identities, questioning religious beliefs, political beliefs. And these are other aspects of people's experience that can cause discrimination, victimization experiences, as well as just, you know, more isolating experiences. And probably not surprising to anyone, sexual assault and harassment are super prevalent on college and university campuses. For example, in the last, you know, National Campus Climate Survey by the AAU, 13% of students reported experiencing sexual assault at some point in their college tenures, and 41% reported experiencing sexual harassment. And of course, experiences like that can definitely lend themselves to depression, anxiety, thoughts of suicide. In particular, during the pandemic, some of the research that I did before FSU, back when I was an undergraduate student at Vanderbilt, we conducted focus groups with LGBTQ plus college students from all around the country. And a very common thread was folks having to go back into the closet because they were forced back home early in the pandemic, or they started to form support systems at their university related to their identities, and then suddenly they were cut off from those support systems. And I don't know how many, you know, students I've talked to at this point, younger students who came in to university in 2019 or 2020 when it was either online, hybrid, or right before the pandemic hit, and they never had a chance to make any friends or form any support systems. And so there's definitely kind of this social isolation or social disconnectedness effect that I think is definitely affecting students' mental health. And a lot of these things apply to not just undergraduate students, but graduate students as well, although often to a lesser extent, but other stressors come into play for graduate students, like the higher level of competition, overworking, trying to balance commitments between being a student and also, you know, being a researcher and having a, you know, part-time job at your university. And also I have to mention the, you know, national context, not just the pandemic and not just even, you know, monkeypox, the latest public health crisis, but also, you know, assaults on Black lives and on Asian lives in the past couple of years have caused a lot of fear and anger amongst students of color, and reproductive rights and access to gender affirming care constantly being under attack across the country. Also kind of creates this existential dread and anxiety amongst college students. Not to mention that just, you know, anecdotally, we've noticed here in Florida, more and more kids coming into college who have either experienced directly school shootings or lived in a community where a school shooting happened nearby. And there's definitely a very real post-traumatic stress effect that happens because of these increasingly common mass shooting incidents that have been happening around the country. So all of this kind of creates this backdrop where students who are now out in the real world, sort of, but have like limited capability to change all of the things that are happening around them. There's often this sense of hopelessness. In my own experience, as we've been recruiting students for that study that I've talked about up top, normally, you know, maybe a small percentage of students would report frequent thoughts of suicide. It's not something that's super common. But in our last batch of recruitment over the summer, about 20% of the students were reporting thoughts of suicide, which is like way, way, way more than we're used to seeing. And it definitely has caused us to be concerned about the amount of depression and anxiety that our students are experiencing, especially women, LGBTQ students, students of color, given the national context. I didn't prepare as much to say about methods to deal with these issues for the first question, but I just wanted to like provide some context on like what is the state of mental health that I've seen here at FSU and more generally.
Yeah, thank you, Lee, for that excellent framing. And, you know, not only the comprehensive kind of scope of what you just provided us in terms of what today's college students are facing, but also in the years leading up to their college student enrollment status, as well as the grad students too. You know, they're not always part of the conversation. So I think that's great. Thank you for pointing that out. And just want to give a quick reminder to our audience that please submit questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be moving to the Q&A in just a little bit. But first, Dr. Payne, I'd like to turn back to you. Can you talk to us about why referrals and case management are so important to campus mental health practices, and how do they provide a more holistic picture of a student's experience while on campus?
Yeah, absolutely. So here at Duke, we have 15,192 students. That includes undergraduate and graduate students. Like you mentioned, Dr. Smith, graduate students can be left out, but they're included in that number, I assure you. We like to think that we can do it all here at Duke CAPS and just student affairs in general. Unfortunately, on campus wellness centers, we can't be everything to everybody, and that's difficult at times to grasp and difficult at times to deal with, but we certainly try to do our best. One thing that individuals have discussed and considered are, having more staff. And the metaphor that I like to refer to is it's similar to like a Los Angeles freeway in a sense. So maybe one lane of the freeway is clogged, so you add another lane, or you add another clinician in a sense. Well, then 2 weeks later, that lane is clogged, and then you add another one, and then you add another one and another one, and they kind of keep getting clogged. So in a sense, you can't really build your way or hire your way out of this particular problem or concern. So that's where the referral piece kind of comes in. Here at Duke CAPS, we have a great relationship with a lot of our Durham community mental health providers, and we're able to refer students out to them. Psychiatrists, social workers, counselors. We're able to refer students out if they need any more long-term services or maybe want to meet on a more frequent basis. It's great to have that relationship with just those providers because, like we mentioned, we see a great deal of students, and unfortunately we can't. We're more short-term, and unfortunately we can't work with them for a long period of time. So if they're able to receive services in the community, that's extremely helpful for them. In terms of the referral process in general, we'll typically give students a list of options from our community providers based off of the preferences that they've given us, and we'll narrow it down for them to maybe about 4 or 5 different providers, because if the ones that we've asked, looking for a mental health provider is an extremely taxing task in itself. It can be extremely overwhelming if you're searching for just any kind of mental health concern, and maybe you're looking for a specific provider and you're not sure what provider accepts your insurance, or you want a specific maybe therapeutic modality. So we're able to help assist students with all that type of that search in general. We also have a great student affairs organization called Duke Reach, and they help our students. They help our students, our faculty, staff, parents to provide individuals and students with any resources that they may have, that students may need. They have something called the 2-click mental health form, and what that form is, it's a really quick submission where students will just click, I have a mental health concern, and someone from Duke Reach or our student organization, which is Peer for You, will respond to them, and they can talk to students or Duke Reach about anything from academic stress to homesickness to fraternity or sorority rushes, to anything regarding student life, any academic concerns, any friendship concerns as well. In terms of other resources we are partnered with TimelyMD, which provides telemental health services for our students at times when they go home during breaks. they're able to utilize Timely MD. They get, I believe, 12 free sessions, and they're able to work with counselors virtually if we're not able to, see them at a particular time. And then lastly, there's dupe caps for any of our undergraduate and graduate students. And I just say that to say that I list kind of all these resources because, really one particular organization can't really do it all. So we have to work together as a collective to make sure that, students' mental health and their well-beings are being served. In terms of referrals and case management, they provide a more holistic picture of students' experiences because it takes various kind of entities to assess the needs of students. For example, if a student comes in and they have a disordered eating concern, they may need nutritional support. So we're able to connect them with our nutritionist here in the Wellness Center. They may need some mental health support, so we could connect them with a counselor here or a counselor in the community. We also may be able to reach out to groups in the community that focus on disordered eatings as well. We can also reach out to Duke Reach, who would be able to maybe talk with their RC and contact their RC, the residential life coordinator, and have them maybe do a wellness check on them to make sure that they're, eating the required meals that they need and checking in with them. I think like Dr. Megan mentioned, dining is essential as well. We could reach out to someone from dining, see if they could provide some assistance for the student as well. So it's kind of a collective, definitely a collective in a sense, because we want to make sure that all these entities are working with the student to best address their needs that they may have.
Well, thank you, Dr. Payne. I definitely appreciate your Los Angeles highway analogy. So we'll be using that on our end. Thank you. But also, I think your comments just speak to not only the importance of relationship building within the institution, but also between the institutions and their surrounding communities, of course, when it comes to managing the caseloads. So thank you for that insight. And Dr. Ment, turning back to you, we know that student affairs professionals also experience burnout and fatigue. So what are some best practices for supporting faculty and staff on campus?
Well, thank you, Dr. Smith. Before I answer that question, though, I just want to applaud Dr. Payne and Duke University for that, making those connections to the off-campus providers. That's a lot of time and effort that they're taking to help their students be successful, and just applaud you for doing that, because it's not easy, right? There's lots of providers out there that no longer want to accept insurance. They just want to have cash payments, those things. So helping your students navigate that, I applaud. And then just want to amplify what Dr. Payne said about, talked about all the different resources available. That's because there is no magic wand to fix this. It takes all of us working together. And that's why I'm so excited we are all doing the mental health first aid across the state together, but just blown away by the great work that's happening out of Duke Caps, and kudos to you and the team there. That's fabulous. All right, so they asked me to talk about self-care. I'm going to get a little fired up and a little loud, so I'm going to try to keep it. All right. So last week I went to a student success conference, and the speaker there was wonderful and was talking about how important it is that we need to be working together to move the needle. And he admitted that he is from rural Georgia. He grew up on a farm, and he said, this is the analogy that I think of. He's like, my daddy used to ask me, are you the chicken or the pig at breakfast? He said, the chicken contributes to breakfast while the pig is committed to breakfast. And he was like, we all need to be committed. And all day long at that conference, I'm like, yes, I am committed. I'm the pig. I'm so committed. I give everything to my students. I'm thinking about a t-shirt I'm going to get my team. I'm so pumped. I'm thinking about books we can read. And then the next day, I start thinking about a little more like how I'm going to talk to my team. And I'm like, that is terrible, Bethany. That is not self-care. The pig gives its life. The pig is not long-term. The chicken has boundaries. The chicken knows when some days you get one egg for me, some days you get no eggs for me, but the chicken is in the long-term game. So I would encourage you all to don't be the pig. I was like, yes, I want to give, but then we can't help our students, right? So let's be more like the chicken and have really good boundaries and be a contributor. Because I think for many of us, at least in the student affairs profession, we think self-care is selfish. And it is so far from being selfish, right, Dr. Payne? It is not. You already mentioned it earlier. If your cup isn't full, you can't help others, right? And that's what we want to be able to do. And also, self-care should not be this one-off, or my kids love The Office, like a treat yourself day. Like that is not what self-care is. It's got to be a routine. You've got to make the time to care about yourself and take care of yourself so that you can excel and take care of others. Now, why is self-care important? There's lots of reasons, but just going to highlight a few in case you're at an institution that isn't really on board with the importance of self-care. Well, we know it increases productivity and efficiency. It helps reduce anxiety. There's also research that shows your immune system is boosted. It can also increase your patience. I have 3 children. I need as much patience as I can get, especially in the morning when I'm trying to get them out the door. And some reason we lose our shoes like every day. I don't know how. We have a shoe closet, but yes. You have a more balanced and happier life. You're able to maximize your potential, and really you're able to create skills to help deal with mental and physical stressors. So we have to be really okay with accepting the concept of self-care and really coming up with a balance for ourselves. And so one of the questions was about, what are some best practices? So I'm going to talk at the macro level and then a little bit at the micro level. So one of the things that I like to do as a leader with my team is I like to pull them to ask them, what can I do to help support this balance for you? Now, don't do this in the middle of the meeting, because if you ask a student affairs professional, what can I do to help you? Most of them are like, I'm fine, I got this. Even though I was on call last night till 2 a.m., I got to work at 8 a.m., I'm great. Don't do it that way. Tell them at our next meeting, I really want to talk about what we can do to help you get that balance, because hear from your team what really helps. The other thing I would encourage you to do as a leader is to really know about your EAP resources, your employee assistance program. I think folks just think EAP is about counseling, but here for the UNC system, it's much more than counseling. If you need research on daycares, there's an online service that will do research for you. If you've got a parent that unfortunately is suffering from Alzheimer's, we have a concierge service that can help you figure out those resources. So learn what free resources you already have to do that. Also, I would say it's really important as the leader to model healthy behaviors. If you're telling your team that you value their family time, you want them to spend time with their family, you want them to forget about work, it's probably not awesome to email them at 10, 11 p.m. at night, right? Or even before 8 a.m. the next morning. Like I had a supervisor once that when I would log in at 8, I already had 8 emails from them. And that just sent me, whoa, buddies, that's too much. That's too much. Some other great resources across the country is our friends at the University of Kentucky. They've launched a self-care program, and here's 3 things that they're doing. And these do cost money, but maybe you could find some of the resources when you talk to your leadership about, I need these things to retain folks. So one of the things they've done for their student affairs folks is free membership to the rec center. So that's encouraging them to get out, exercise, do those things. The other great thing they did was gave the student affairs folks, especially the folks that have to come in the office day to day, meal plans. And what was great about that is that really encouraged the folks to get up from their desk and not eat lunch at their desk, right? Go out into the dining hall, get that walk in, go out, like at least take a little bit of a break. And it was a way to show them appreciation. Then our friends at the University of Kentucky, they have a wonderful hospital system. So they're also able to give their folks gift certificates for like physical therapy and massage. I know not everybody has that, but just thinking about what things work for you all. One of our institutions, UNC Charlotte, this summer did a Blue Apron program, where you can get the groceries delivered to your house and you cook the meal. Well, they did it through their rec center because they have a demo kitchen. So one day a week, you could come to the rec center, pick up the bag of pre-cut groceries, and you could either stay and watch them cook it in the demo or watch a video. So that was so nice for faculty and staff and students to get this bag and like go home and just make this meal that was already ready for them. When I think about the importance of self-care on the micro level, I believe they put a handout in the chat and it talks about all these different things that you can do. But we all know, right? We need to sleep more. We need to eat better. But I would encourage you to look at the University of Buffalo's social work website. And I put that on a link there. They have a lot of great assessments that you can take to kind of rate yourself of where you are in each of these categories. And then from there, you can create a plan. Because, right, you can say you're going to take care of yourself, but if you don't really create a plan, write it down somewhere and then have someone hold you accountable, you're not doing anything good for you. And if you didn't listen to anything else, the only thing I want you to get out of this is self-care is not selfish. If anybody says self-care is not selfish, this is how we keep wonderful professionals in the higher education field. If you can take care of yourself, then you get the honor and blessing of helping students figure out who they are, who they want to be, and how they can change the world. But I need your cup to be filled to do that. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Dr. Min. I appreciate all the analogies coming out today, and I believe one of my favorites is the airplane analogy, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Dr. Min. You can't really help the person next to you unless you're giving yourself air first. So thank you for that reminder for our audience as well. Turning back to you, Lee, what are some best practices you have seen in your research to support self-care awareness for students on campus, either in your own experience as a student or currently kind of in the research realm?
Yeah, I can definitely speak from both perspectives. To talk a bit about what we do in our research lab, because we're often recruiting undergraduate students and we're asking about their thoughts of suicide, primarily as a matter of like ethics, we have to, you know, conduct suicide risk assessments, and we have to provide suicide prevention and crisis resources to students who engage in our research, because it's, you know, when somebody tells you as part of a research study, I am thinking about killing myself, we don't just like collect the data and move on. We have to assess risk. We have to provide resources. That's the only, you know, ethical thing to do. So as part of our risk assessments, we ask about students' coping mechanisms, which among college students can definitely range widely from, you know, just like talking to friends and family, to going to the gym, being active, to, you know, things like drinking and smoking. So at the end of an assessment, we'll help the students develop a safety plan, which we ask them to write on a piece of paper that they can put up on their fridge or tape on the wall above their desk if they, you know, are living in a dorm room. The safety plan involves like healthy coping mechanisms that are, you know, salient to them, that they brainstorm themselves. That can be, you know, things like social interaction, more specific sensory things like smelling a strong candle that has a smell that's pleasant to them, or running ice cubes along their skin for like a cold, like a strong cold, like sensory experience, as well as engaging activities like mentally engaging, doing a puzzle, or physically engaging, like intense exercise. So this, you know, diverse collection of activities that we ask students to put into a safety plan is, the research shows, you know, effective at getting people out of suicide crises, because they have all of these steps that they can walk through, and they know next they can call a crisis line. And yeah, the research shows that it kind of offsets the number of people who are, you know, being forced into psychiatric hospitalization because of suicide crises. So it's really helpful to be proactive about helping students prepare for being in a mental health crisis, because it's becoming more and more common these days. So from a research context, we always have resources ready for students who participate in our studies, just so that, yeah, we can be proactive about their mental health care. From less of a research perspective and more of just kind of a broader student perspective and university perspective, definitely, I think ways to increase awareness about self-care and mental health care broadly have to be diverse and very consistent. I think student organizations and cultural centers have a big piece of the responsibility. You know, organizations and centers for students of color, LGBTQ plus students, religious and spiritual students, they should all be prepared with lists of resources and suggestions, because often when students have shared identities with people in these organizations and in these centers, they turn to them for help, and being prepared with like, here are some resources, here are some things that you can do, I think is super important. And I also think that organizations that are often characterized by, you know, increased substance use and sexual assault and harassment, such as fraternities, sororities, and other Greek life organizations, I do think that they also have a strong responsibility to have a consistent message about mental health care being offered around campus, and self-care options. I also think it's a good idea for professors and other instructors, and I see this to a certain extent, but, you know, not as consistently as I would like to include resources in their syllabi, but also verbally to students about mental health care and self-care opportunities on campus, as well as to make reminders during those periods of high stress, or even prior to those periods of high stress of like midterms and finals and around graduation, and all those times when students are more likely to go into crisis mode. Professors should be prepared in advance for that to happen, and easily or readily be offering resources to students during classes, so they know where to access that stuff before the crisis happens. And perhaps most obviously, of course, wellness centers like on campuses play a big part. My undergraduate institution had a center for student well-being that was more focused on non-traditional healing and self-care type things like meditation and yoga, where students could kind of learn those skills that they can take with them back to their dorm rooms or back to their apartments, and still have ways to be mindful and to relax, because students, don't always have an hour every week or every 2 weeks to set aside to go to a therapy session. And like was said before, counseling and psychological services at campuses often have time limits on how long students can utilize their services, like a few semesters, even though there are students with like chronic depression and chronic anxiety and other chronic mental illnesses who need more support, which of course those time limits make sense to be able to offer care to as many students as possible. But the reality often is that some students do need long-term care. And so having some methods and coping mechanisms that they can learn at these wellness centers and then take on their own to continue using when they no longer have access to that guided care, I think is super important. So basically the broader idea that I wanted to get at is that raising awareness for self-care and mental health care really requires a multi-pronged approach. It can't just be mental health professionals like psychologists and counselors on campus advocating for self-care and mental health care. It has to be a cohesive, integrated message provided from every person that a student is likely to have contact with in the college or university setting. Faculty, student affairs professionals, research coordinators, residential assistants, all of those folks, because however much mental health professionals advocate for the importance of mental health, it sometimes doesn't really get through to students if they're not hearing it from their professors and mentors as well, because the pressures of work and school and the future, it's all telling them, skip that meal, do a bit more work, or get up earlier than you really should to go to that networking event, or commit to every opportunity that's coming across your path, even if it means that you get less time to spend with friends. So the message really has to come from every possible avenue, because that's the only way, from my perspective, to minimize the number of students who find themselves isolated and in crisis without access to care.
Thanks so much for that, Lee. And I'm hearing several themes across the panelists, including, I believe, the importance and the emphasis on being proactive in this space, as well as just considering the culture of care concept that Dr. Menn spoke of earlier. So, and then Lee, thank you for also acknowledging the diverse needs of all learners across campus, and really tailoring mental health practices to those diverse needs. Extremely important as well. So thanks so much for that. And now I do want to open up the floor to a Q&A. We do have a question from the audience. So I'm actually going to direct this to Dr. Menn, and going back to this theme of proactivity. Dr. Payne and Lee kind of both spoke, and you did as well, to this, and kind of how they've observed proactivity on their respective campuses. But are you observing institutions across the UNC system in particular doing more proactive checks to engage students and expose them to the resources available as part of the campus culture and curriculum?
Oh, certainly. And it takes shape. I love what Lee said about it has to be this multifaceted approach, right? We have intrusive advising. So we have it from the academic side, checking in with you how you're doing. On the residence hall side, right? The programming, checking to make sure students are getting out, being engaged. Appreciate what the faculty do by, putting in the syllabus about all the resources we have now. Not every student reads the syllabus, but take that extra step is you invite the resources to your class one day or part of the day to talk about those things, right? We can no longer be reactive, right? Or we're not doing what we need to do to be supportive. And I'm sure Dr. Payne and Lee could speak to, if we really wait to be reactive, in many ways, that poor student has probably lost a whole semester in many ways, and we can't get them back on track academically or help them in that way. So we don't want to be reactive because they might have to take a semester off, or it gets them further off their path. And so thinking about all the ways to, from orientation, where we talk about those resources, where we get them connected to, like I said, the academic advising, to the residence halls. And then I loved what Lee also said about, making sure that fraternity and sorority life, all of these other folks, right, are committed to this too, and they have to be intrusive in there. It's just so unfortunate. The pandemic just exacerbated what we already knew. And now we've got this generation of students, and we're going to have them for a very long time, that have suffered. And I just really use that term, suffered, right? And how do we help them before they get too far in that hole where it's so hard to do it? But I appreciate that question. That's wonderful. And I'd love to hear from others how their institutions are being proactive.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mann. Dr. Payne, would you like to speak to that a bit as well?
Yeah, I certainly can. Dr. Min, I appreciate your perspective, and I appreciate you being here and just kind of being, like you mentioned, in the thick of it right now. I like to think I'm not too far removed, but I am, being that I graduated way a long time ago. But in terms of how we kind of implemented just wellness with our freshman class, I know we wanted to make sure that we were more proactive in a sense rather than reactive. So what we did is we had little student groups, student kind of orientation groups in a sense. And one group was focused on wellness per se. And that particular group, they did little activities around campus. I think one of them was like a mindful coloring. They got to make like a journal as well. They were able to tour and explore Duke Gardens and do like a mindful walk as well. And I think one thing that was extremely beneficial for them is they were able to tour the wellness center as well and just come and see the space and really just become comfortable with it and see it. Because our freshmen are located on the other side of campus, and they have to take a bus to get here. So it's pretty far. And it's not something they would particularly be familiar with unless someone like told them where it was. So we were certainly appreciative of the individuals that were in that wellness group. I definitely think we had an uptick in freshmen that we were able to see prior to school starting, because this orientation group took place prior to school starting. So we had freshmen, come in at the end of the day, wanting to establish some counseling services, being proactive rather than reactive in a sense, like Dr. Van, not missing that semester or falling behind in that semester and then reacting and coming to us, but being more proactive in a sense.
Thank you for your perspective as well, Dr. Payne. And Lee, turning back to you, we had an audience member. Thank you for what you said about hearing about this culture of care from everyone to make it feel authentic and accessible. And there was a question about, have you heard anything about possibly requiring faculty to mention sort of mental health resources in all classrooms? And I don't know if Dr. Payne or Dr. Men, you want to weigh on this as well, but Lee, we'll start with you. Have you heard anything around faculty increasingly adopting that practice?
In my experience, it is pretty common. I do try to read through syllabi in full, especially now that I have fewer classes. It's not as hard to do as a graduate student. But I think consistently, there will be mentions of where to access like student access services for accommodations. And I think almost always there's a mention of like counseling and psychological services here at FSU, and that was the case at Vanderbilt as well. But it was usually a thing that wasn't verbally acknowledged on the first day of class, and definitely not, rehashed at critical points throughout the semester, like midterms and finals, when students are really starting to spiral. And I agree. I'm gonna say your name wrong. I'm sorry, Dr. Men. I think having, resources come to the classroom, I think is a really good idea. Having representatives from counseling and psychological services or any other wellness centers on campus, or even if it's possible through like off campus or community connections, making sure that those organizations and resources have a presence on campus. I think that that's a really good idea that should definitely be utilized more. But personally, in my experience, it's more of the resources are, in the barest sense, made available by faculty by being, printed on the syllabus. But I have personally never, seen a faculty member going out of their way to kind of remind students, like, these are things that are always available to you at those important points throughout the semester. But I would love to hear from Dr. Payne and Dr. Mann about, your own perspectives from the non-student perspective on that.
Thank you, Lee. Dr. Ben, have you heard anything at the system level with regards to faculty participating?
Sure. Yeah, I want to brag on one of our institutions and say at UNC Greensboro, their faculty assembly has been very supportive of this. And what they did, that leadership of faculty assembly is very supportive of promoting those resources. They asked the counseling center director and assistant director to come to faculty orientation and talk about all the services that they do and how they can help students. And that way everyone at faculty orientation got to hear and then got to put a face with a name. UNC Greensboro is a regional institution, large, 10, 12,000 students. And so getting to meet those folks, and then they did a presentation for them about what we do, and then also did kind of a self-care presentation. And so that was wonderful for them to sort of talk about, this is what we do. These are the things you're seeing in your students, because I think Dr. Payne and Lee both touched on it. Students that we saw 3 years ago are very different than the students we're seeing now, right? And so giving those faculty the tools to know that you got to think, and I think as Dr. Payne mentioned it, like they miss so many milestones, right? Or they miss that social interaction or that time to mature. So perhaps they're 18 now, but maybe they're still closer to 16 or 15 in life experience, right? And I have a junior in high school, and I think we didn't let him out of the house for 2 years because there was a pandemic. So he missed some of that growth and things. But yeah, so I want to brag about UNC Greensboro. So that's one of the ways they did it, as the faculty senate leadership said, this is important to us. They brought the counseling center folks to that meeting. They talked about what we do, and then they offered to be like, let us know how we can be a good resource. And so I think that's one way you can do it. You can certainly mandate in many ways, right? You can say, gosh, this would be great if you put it in your syllabus. But Lee touched on this really well, right? Just because it's there doesn't mean that the faculty member reminds folks about it. And so I think it's so important, like she mentioned, like, before midterms, before finals, those things, like for the faculty to say, if you're struggling, just a reminder, we have after-hour counseling hours, here it is, or just send an email. Like, this is a great month, right? This is September, self-awareness month. As a faculty, you could send out an email. Hey, everybody, this is September. What are you doing for yourself? What are you doing to keep this going? Does that take extra time on the faculty's part? Yes, but all the faculty that I've met and interacted with, they want to see their students be successful. And this is another way to help them do that. And they themselves too, that we don't want to forget them, as Lee mentioned, right? Our faculty and staff, they've had a hard pandemic too. So we as leaders, we got to check in on them. Like this week, we sent our counseling center directors and student health center directors just little $10 gift cards to Starbucks, but just to say, hey, take a 10-minute break, go get a coffee. Don't tell anybody where you're going so they can't bother you with work. And like, just take time for yourself to recharge. And we've got to be committed to that. But I love what Lee was saying about it's everybody doing this good work.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mann. And there was more appreciation for another one of Lee's comments, I believe Lee made about the fraternities and sororities playing a role in mental health. And actually, Dr. Mann, I would like to get your student affairs perspective on this too. Is there a movement afoot in Greek life to address a sense of well-being within their activities? The comment was students may have, they may deal with anxiety due to the level of personal evaluation that is required when rushing, but is this more a part of the culture from what you're seeing or hearing?
Well, great. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And I will say this, our student leaders within Grief Life understand that for their members to be successful academically, socially, that their mental health is important. And so I've seen some wonderful programs across the system, and I can send some links out later about where they're making a commitment to that, because they realize that for them to be active in the organization, that they need a strong mental health. I appreciate the comment too about rush, right? That is a lot of anxiety, and that's a lot of self-analysis. I think really across the country, we've done a better job of putting together more comprehensive rush programs that help students mitigate those stressors and those challenges, and also focus on what you get out of being in Greek life, right? The scholarship, the friendships, the career development pieces, all those good things. But is there room for improvement? Oh, of course, but there's still things that I need to be doing better as a student affairs professional to make sure that we're helping focus on mental health. But I do want to applaud many of the Greeks, especially in the UNC system, because they've taken it seriously. They are often the ones, the leaders, talking about breaking down that stigma that Dr. Payne mentioned, like, right? It's in many ways, going to counseling is just like, going to the dentist. It's another way to take care of yourself. And so I really thank those, especially at some of our larger institutions, for the good work they're doing. And man, am I on the smartest panel ever? Lee and Dr. Payne are just knocking it out of the park. I'm just so thankful to be here. And Dr. Payne said he graduated a really long time ago. And let's be honest, I graduated way longer than everyone else. So I'm just loving this panel. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Min. I appreciate that. And of course, being the Hunt Institute, we would be remiss not to bring policymakers into this discussion. Of course, they have a key role here as well. And Dr. Payne, I'd actually love to get your perspective before we wrap up here on what are some strategies policymakers could use to support student mental health in their respective states from your perspective?
Absolutely, that's a great question, Dr. Smith. I think one thing here at times, it's beneficial when you're able to hear from the students what's going on, like hear from their perspectives and just get their perspectives regarding everything, because they're the ones that are going to be impacted by the policies that are passed and the laws that are passed and the grants that are accepted and things of that nature. So we have a very ambitious student life here. So when they're determined and they want something, they will push and they will definitely talk to leadership involved. So I think that's something that's certainly important, reaching out not only to individuals in Dr. Ben's position, my position, but talking to individuals like from the student perspective, like Lee's perspective, getting their viewpoints about it, and collectively trying to make sure that you're addressing the needs of the people that are being involved is important as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Payne, for all of our policymaking audience that might be tuning in today. We do have one last question from the audience. Let's see. Let's see. Dr. Min, I think I'm going to go back to you for this one. So how are you tackling the challenge of supporting the student body, including leaders and instructors? That one just came in from the audience. So wanted to make sure we got that in before we wrap up.
Well, wonderful question. And I think it really depends on the type of institution you're at and the culture you have, right? And we talked earlier about this culture of care. So you really need to create supports and resources that fit your community's needs, and then also being cognizant of what resources you have around you. What we can do at an Elizabeth City State University out there versus what we can do at a North Carolina State and Raleigh is very different. And they're also very different communities. And so what I would encourage folks to do is, to be really serious about this and to take this as a serious issue is, you need to form, and Lee talked about this earlier, is it's everyone's job, right? So this multifaceted committee, and I know everyone's really busy, but you need lots of different voices. And Dr. Payne mentioned this too, the student voice. So we need lots of folks around the table talking about, well, this is what my team, this is what my faculty are struggling with, or this is what my staff is struggling with. All right, so what are things we can do? And it certainly involves the CAPS folks, but we know CAPS can't be everywhere and everything to folks. So thinking about how do you do that? And so I think a lot of those things you have to determine what works based on what your institution needs, what are your resources, and what is your institutional commitment to really supporting them during this time. I will say though, we have seen great work across the UNC system, understanding the importance of pouring into our faculty and staff. We have all heard about the Great Resignation. We don't want to lose faculty and staff. We have the best faculty and staff, I'm going to say it, in the whole country. Sorry, Dr. Payne, sorry, Lee, we have them, and we want to do whatever we can to retain them because they are turning out the best and the brightest, and they are pouring into their students each and every day. So I would say it really just depends on your institution. There's a lot of great places out there. The handout that I sent gave some examples of some things you can do, but I would be really hesitant to say, well, if you do this, it's going to make everything better. I would think the thing you need to do is you need to create a group, and you need to listen to what your campus needs and then figure out how you can do it to help them. But thank you for that question. That's wonderful. Or get Dr. Payne and Lee to come to your campus and speak. I think that would be really helpful too, friends. I'll say that one. I'll definitely agree to that one. Yes.
Yeah, I think you started some healthy competition here, so I'll love to see where this goes today across institutions and systems. So thanks so much, Dr. Men. And I wish I could keep this conversation going, of course, but I want to give a special thanks to our brilliant panelists today. Dr. Men, Dr. Payne, and Lee, such an insightful conversation. And we, of course, appreciate our virtual audience members as well. Before closing today's discussion, I do want to share some upcoming webinars in our partnered series as well. So on October 13th, please join us for Engines for Equity, the role of community colleges in access to higher education. That one's done in partnership with the wonderful Belk Center. Also on October 27th, we will have a special series with the College Board where we will discuss SAT accessibility in the new online testing format. It's coming up there. So also November 13th, we will talk about the importance of creating avenues to workforce advancement. So any of all of those, we would welcome your participation. Thanks again to the panelists, and I will see you all next time.